Hi there guys, got another video here for you today on the M3. So this video is going to be the second part of the Plenum tuning. In the last video we just fitted the Plenum plug, and in this video I wanted to talk about the results and some of the theory behind putting a Plenum plug in. So first of all, what I thought we'd do is just talk through some of the things the Plenum plug did and didn't do. Okay then, so the first thing we'll talk about is the things it did do. Installing the Plenum plug did reduce the first shot creep. It didn't alleviate the problem completely, however it did make it a lot better. Usually, in the time that it takes to load a magazine for the FX Impact, once you've reinstalled the magazine and are ready to get back to shooting again, the first shot will be a little higher. That's fairly common on FX rifles, but they usually settle right down again after one or two shots. Installing the Plenum plug did help to mitigate this problem, however it didn't eliminate it completely. If you left the rifle for extended periods of time, say 10 to 15 minutes, the first shot would be a little higher. While we were shooting the rifle throughout the day, we put the chronograph on it a number of times. And whilst it's not a night and day difference, I will say that the Plenum plug gave us a slightly better consistency. On average, I would say it's between 3 and 5 per second better over about 10 or 15 shots. So not a massive difference, but definitely a nice little improvement. So now we'll talk a little bit about what the Plenum plug didn't do. Now, fitting the Plenum plug didn't dramatically change the way the rifle shot. I would say that the overall accuracy was very slightly better. I would guess that's something to do with the consistency, but I'm not going to lie and say the difference was very noticeable. It was marginal at best, and I think the slightly better accuracy came down to just the better consistency within the rifle. It didn't make the efficiency much better. If anything, I would say the efficiency's gotten a little worse since fitting the Plenum plug, and I'll explain a little bit of why I think that happened when we get to the theory side of things. But if anything, I would say the efficiency is very slightly worse. I mean, this has got a 580 bottle on it, and we're still getting tons of shots out of it, at least a whole tin of pellets. The last thing I want to mention is that the Plenum plug didn't really change the way the rifle felt. It wasn't noticeably quieter or smoother or anything like that. The Plenum plug is purely and solely to try and get the regulators working a little better. So now that I've told you a little bit about the results of the experiment with the Plenum chamber, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the theory behind the operation. So as I explained in the last video, the plenum is a store of regulated air, and the larger the plenum is, the more potential for power you have, as you have a greater amount of air available to the back of the pellet. Now, because I'm in the UK, we're bound by the sub 12 pound law. You don't need a large amount of air available to the back of the pellet in order to get it moving at the required speed. So for this rifle, the plenum pressure is 50 bar. That means the pressure inside the plenum is 50 times greater than atmospheric pressure. As we fire the rifle, the valve opens and allows the 50 bar pressure to vent to atmosphere. When the valve is opened, there's no longer a seal on the pressure, so it's allowed to vent to atmosphere through the barrel. This causes it to expand and push the pellet down the end of the barrel. So in the operation of firing the rifle, a volume of air is lost from the plenum. This volume loss causes a pressure drop and de-seats the regulator from sealing against the adjuster screw. This opens the regulator and allows bottle pressure to flow in through the regulator and fill the plenum back up. This pressure drop is dictated by the plenum volume. The larger the plenum volume, the lower the pressure drop, and the smaller the plenum, the greater the pressure drop. Now, by blanking off the plenum, what we've essentially done is reduce the plenum volume and created a greater pressure drop in the plenum when the rifle is fired. This larger pressure drop, in theory, should create a more reliable reg operation. Now, I say in theory because it's just something I've observed, but I haven't taken the time to properly map it out scientifically, so I can't say for certain, but it is something I have noticed consistently when altering the plenum volume. Not just on the Impact, but with other rifles such as the Crown. Now, after hearing that, what you might think is, why do we even have a plenum at all? You just said that reducing the plenum volume create a more reliable reg operation. So if we had no plenum, theoretically it should be a perfect reg. But unfortunately that's not the case. So there's two reasons for that. Number one, We do need some plenum volume and able to get the power that we want. No plenum volume equals no power. Now the general rule of thumb for that is between half a cc and 1 cc per foot-pound of energy. That's not an exact science, but that's just a little rule to go by. So in theory, for a sub 12 foot-pound rifle, we should really be aiming for a plenum volume of between 6 and 12. The second reason is that the plenum also has an auxiliary job, and that is to assist in closing the valve. Obviously our valve is in here and it seals up against a valve seat. When we fire the rifle, the valve deseats from the valve seat and allows air to pass through and through the barrel. The reg pressure, along with the long spring that's in here, helps close that valve after the shot. Now, as I said before, I said the efficiency of the rifle may be slightly worse with the plenum plug installed. This is the reason why I believe that. Because there's a greater pressure drop in the plenum, there's not as much force on the back of the valve forcing it closed. Obviously when we're talking about this, we're talking about fractions of a second, but obviously over 500 shots, all them fractions of a second adds up. Right then, now that we've been talking about the smaller plenum for a little while now, I just want to talk about the effects of putting a big plenum on. So this is the power plenum. It's not the 720 plenum, but it is the older or the Mark II power plenum. So what I've done is I've just swapped the power plenum over, readjusted the rifle so it's shooting at a very similar FPS to the tests with the plenum plug in it, and I just thought I'd share with you the results of a power plenum. Here's the results. Sorry about the writing, I was writing as I was shooting, so it was a bit of a rush. But as you can see here, this is the shot string I did with the plug in it. I did cherry pick this one, if I'm honest. It was the best one of the tests I did, and that's got a spread of 7, but it'd be even lower if you took out the higher reading here. But I left that in just so you can see what it's like. And these ones are the ones I did with the power plenum. I did do quite a few shot strings with the power plenum just to give it a chance to bed in, but all the shot strings I did seem to do the same thing. So there's a couple of observations I made when I installed the power plenum and done the shot strings. Number one is the rise in power as we shot the rifle more. Every single shot string I did this. We started off at 1 feet per second and it gradually rose as we shot the rifle more. Second thing I noticed when installing the power plenum is that the regulator had a high amount of creep when you left it. For example, the gap between these two shot strings was about 10 or 15 minutes. I made a coffee in between shooting these two strings, but I didn't adjust any settings on the rifle. You can see we ended up at about 716 feet per second with this one. These are obviously heavies, and then when we came back to the rifle, it was shooting low at 683. It did start to rise at the end, but the feet per second was quite random. I wasn't really shooting the rifle enough to notice any great change in efficiency, and of course these results are just for my gun. They may be different from your one, but those are the general observations I made when I installed the power plenum. Right then guys, that's going to about do it for this one. So the plenum plug, not a miracle cure, but a nice little step in the right direction, and an upgrade that hasn't really cost us anything. A little better on the consistency, little less reg creep for the cost of just a few shots. So I'd say that's a pretty worthwhile trade. But that's going to be it for this one guys. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.